injunction for irreparable harm, and they withdrew
Injunction
that.
means they can stop it.
Well, the court has the opportunity to either stop it or address it in a way in which would stop a harmful act for the future. But as I said before, the plaintiffs withdrew that request for a preliminary injunction and decided to pursue it through dispositive motions in summary judgment fashion.
Now, as we indicated earlier, there are several toll-free options for truckers, I-81, 78, at least one other. Might the availability of these non-toll options undermine the truckers' argument?
It would, and I think that might have been one of the reasons why they withdrew their preliminary injunction. The tolls have been increased for several years now, and so there was not a harm which was irreparable. Also, there's other roads, as you stated, other roads that they could take in order to go away from the toll roads and drive without a fee.
As far as the timing is concerned, Frank, why do you suppose the truckers are making their argument now as opposed to years ago?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer to that, but there's been other cases that have been filed in other states which are similar to this. There's a case in New York that was brought against the New York Thruway Commission.
Which is a toll road, I suppose, the Thruway in New York?
It is. And they claimed that money was being diverted for the canal. And there was a case in Ohio that's still pending that's saying that the tolls that were used in Ohio were being diverted for a specific earmarked purpose for a new project, and that case is still ongoing.
Now in New York, I'm intrigued by the use of the word canal. They have themselves a canal system? They're literally canals?
Yeah. Huh. And so that case lasted for a while, but it's now been decided. It went on appeal.
Okay.
And that case,
and how'd that turn out?
The courts decided that the legislature specifically earmarked those funds for that purpose and decided against the plaintiffs in that case.
Now, can the timing of this lawsuit have any bearing on how it turns out? In other words, if the truckers could have made their arguments a few years ago, they could have done that, but they didn't.
They didn't. I don't know, it's still a harm. They still believe it's a harm. And I don't think that the timing is going to impact the case because it's a legal issue as to whether or not the constitutionality of their claim is valid or not. And I think that, they believe that, there are unconstitutional means going on that continue, which the courts need to address.
Now, I understand, Frank, that you've outlined a possible compromise outcome. The outcome here isn't necessarily the truckers winning or losing, but a compromise that might even benefit anybody that drives the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Tell us about that.
Well, it's like in any case. You might have a plaintiff that files a claim that are very strong-willed with their purpose. But in all cases, the very small amount of cases go all the way. I think that 98% of the cases today are settled or compromised. This might have such an impact on the legislature that the legislature might need to address this in some fashion in order to compromise what impact it might have.
Because otherwise we're facing increases every year, aren't we?
We are. And the Act 4489 has a required stipend that has to be paid every year to PennDOT. And right now, they have to meet that obligation.
Well, my understanding of the fee schedule for increases is 6% per year, every year through 2044. That sounds like a lot.
It's a lot of money. And like I said, the total amount of revenue to be diverted to PennDOT, I think, is $9.6 billion over that length of time.
And if the Turnpike is not able to get the money to PennDOT as a result of losing a case like this, let's just say they do, what happens?
Well, the Turnpike Commission has taken out bonds in order to assure that these monies will be passed on to PennDOT as...
Oh, they've already taken action to anticipate the outcome of this case?
No, they've already taken, as soon as the act was put into force, when it was enacted.
Act 44,
Act 44.
years ago.
Years ago, back in 2008, they've incurred obligations for bonds, and they paid over $1 billion in interest on these bonds. And so that's another concern that needs to be given with regards to moving forward. Is the state able to find another revenue source, which it wasn't able to find for fixing of highways and bridges and diverting funds for different purposes? They were able to convince and get a vote on having this as a revenue stream, but the constitutionality of it is being challenged now.
Frank, have you ever seen a case like this yourself that challenged a very substantial funding engine for Pennsylvania like this?
Well, there's always cases that are filed, but I would think that
Comparable cases?
Comparable cases in a sense that always challenge taxing, and it's not uncommon, but
Is this the first time someone's gone after the Turnpike in a major way? Maybe that's the question.
Against the Turnpike, yes. And I think the Turnpike has been such a docile part of our existence that it was an agency that was run smoothly. The funds that it took in was for the specific purpose of maintaining the roads and running the Turnpike, and then all of a sudden they decided that by the Act 44 to raise it because of other reasons.
Now let's talk about the future of the truckers' lawsuit. Just how soon will it go to court? Will it necessarily even go to court at this point?
Well, I think that what we'll see is there's been a scheduling order that's been in place by the federal court in the Middle District of Pennsylvania, which requires the parties to submit briefs. Those briefs will be submitted over the next course of several months through the summer. Reply briefs will be filed, and then the decision will be made. As soon as that decision is made, like I said, the likely consequence will be an appeal to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. It will go that far based on this constitutional issue.
And if the truckers are successful here, do you see this as an important precedent? Again, challenging not just the Turnpike, but state funding in general.
Well, I believe that if the truckers are successful, they would have accomplished their main goal of raising constitutional issues for the legislature to give a lot more consideration to, rather than looking at a way in which to generate revenue. They might have to look at other revenue streams that exist in order to pay for what the state needs to handle its own financial situation.
And we have just a few minutes left, Frank. So as far as you're concerned, what might be the most serious obstacle for the truckers to make this argument in order to recover this $6 billion?
Well, I think that so far as the truckers are concerned, the constitutionality of whether or not the legislature has the right to enact legislation in order to address its needs, and whether or not the infringement on the truckers are to such a great extent that the courts will address on the issue of the user fee, and whether or not the legislature is capable of creating a source of income that might have an undue burden on them.
And as far as you're concerned, for the possible outcome here, what would you like to see? Maybe the compromise you described a few minutes ago.
I think that, way in which any case is brought, there's issues on both sides, and there's strong issues on both sides, difficult issues on both sides, to such an extent that it implicates constitutional arguments. And in a way in which I see the best likely possible outcome would be a compromise. A compromise in which both parties are able to understand that you can only do so much, but you have to give a little.
And again, that impact could certainly affect everyone who drives the Pennsylvania Turnpike, because if we revisit this aggressive toll hiking schedule, that's good news.
It's good news, although that the number of people who transgress Pennsylvania's Turnpike, truckers comprise 15% of the total amount of drivers that drive during the course of the year, but they pay over half of the revenue that's generated by the Turnpike.
Because of the size of their vehicle and the load.
Yes.
Frank Botta is the immediate past president of the Transportation Lawyers Association. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.